Hello. So today we have Anokhi Parikh here with us. She is a co-founder of SEL Lab. They are focusing on social-emotional learning on individual and institutional levels. She also worked with children from different backgrounds for 6 years. Hi, Anoki. It's
Hi,
very nice to
Shakti.
see you.
It's
Thank you so
lovely
much
being here.
So we wanted to ask you, how did you start your path in education system? Because as far as I know, you have a PhD in economics.
Yeah.
So that was very interesting to know.
So I have a pretty crazy journey to education, actually. So I actually did my education in business, finance, and I got a PhD in economics. I was an anchor on CNBC TV 18. But since I was very young, since I was 15, I was always extremely drawn to the development sector and extremely drawn to the idea of education changing the world. But I grew up in a social setup where science was key and business was key, and that was a legit career. And very early on, while I was still at CNBC, I said, hey, listen, maybe I'll spend 10, 15 years in having like a proper career, and then I'll move to education and I'll do good for the world. And in that time, I sort of took a step back and said, everybody says this, right? And we can't wait 15 years to sort of contribute to the world. And that's what I said, that if it has to happen, it has to happen today. And it needs me to do it today while I'm full of energy, while I'm young. And there are difficulties in being in the development sector today. At that time, I didn't go straight into the education sector. I was still in development. And what deeply always bothered me was inequalities across sectors, right? Whether it was gender, disability, conflict zones, and children growing up in violence, that deeply, deeply bothered me. So I started to head a program where I said, hey, listen, maybe just to like test the waters, I'll take a year after I finish my PhD and let me see, take a break and let me see if I can do something this year, and then I'll go back eventually. And I went in and that was it. Like I said, like, this is where I belong. This is who I am. This is where I contribute to the world. And in those 6 years, I realized that, and this is something that I always tell the youth when I'm talking to them, is you don't have to be in the development sector to change the world, right? Like, but I belonged there because I loved it so deeply and I loved education, and I was able to look at it in a certain way and be so passionate. But you can be in any field and do the same thing. But I belonged there. So I kind of took a full like deep dive into it. And those years of education, when I worked with certain schools that were highly rich in introspection, reflection, in teaching children social and emotional literacy, I started to see what they were creating there. And the children that walked out of those schools were the ones that were going to change the world. And I recently started my own organization that is now advocating, training, and working on social emotional learning, because I feel like somewhere in the world we need to change the way we look at education, because it is the single platform to me that I think will change the world. So that was my very wonky journey into education.
Oh, wow. This is so inspiring. This is beautiful. So I wanted to ask that, what do you think the significance of peace is there like today? Like, based on your experience, how do you see it?
I think there's never been a time in history when peace has not been significant. There have been far greater years during the world wars that we've seen incredible human cruelty. So I don't think there's ever a time where it's not important, but it's important in different ways. I feel like what we're struggling with as far as peace is concerned today is the divide between the youth, right? Where a lot of, we have political giants and tech giants and media giants that are starting to take advantage of difference of opinions that the youth have. And that divide, I feel, is the farthest away than we've seen in history ever. And I think that's something the youth has to take a step back and say, hey, listen, like, am I being brainwashed? Is this really what it is? Can I open my mind to another point of view? And even if I don't want to, can I make room for everybody's opinion here? Why hate speech has become something that bothers me so deeply, that we've gotten a platform where we can do such amazing things with it, which is technology, but why are we using it for hate, right? I feel like peace from that point of view today to the youth has been incredibly important. And we got to take a step back today and say, what is the world we want in the next 50 years, right? Can we, for a moment, forgive, accept, make room for every kind of person in the world, grow our circles a little bit, accept people a little bit, love a little bit, and look forward to build a world that is full of peace.
Oh. So how do you think, what can youth do to have a more peaceful life?
I think the first thing we kind of have to do, and this is something I practice myself, is micro movements. And I think peace always comes in micro movements. I don't think we can imagine world peace if we're not innately happy or peaceful within ourselves. And within ourselves, in our close relationships, within our inner circles, are we able to practice things that we're imagining the world is going to practice? So I think for the youth itself, there are actually beautiful practices that have been researched really, really well scientifically, and CIT is one of them by Life University that I actually teach, which I think I believe in it so much because it's scientifically backed up. It makes sense. And I think the youth needs that, right? It needs reason and it needs an answer for what we're teaching. And I think the youth has to start practicing that at a singular level and slowly, slowly open that out into the world.
And what helps you personally to have a more peaceful life?
I think it's always a state of mind, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we don't go through like hard times, or we don't go through times where we're not resilient. And I actually use practices to be able to bring myself in. And for me, from the time that I went into the sector and I started to see conflict and violence and children going through all that, I always took a step back and said that the safety of my own life that I can create is always going to be my biggest strength. So I always make sure that my relationships around me are extremely peaceful. And that doesn't mean you don't confront. That doesn't mean you don't have a dialogue. That doesn't mean you don't have difference of opinion. But that can all live within peace. And I think we have to we have to start to accept that we can be different people within the same place, within an environment of peace.
But how can we do that? Like, how can we have a more peaceful conversation? For example, sometimes we have so many emotions, you know.
It's okay. There's nothing wrong in having emotions. I think that's the first thing. I was an extremely emotional child. A lot of why I teach social and emotional literacy is because I was an extremely emotional child. To be sensitive, to be emotional, to be angry, those are human emotions. What we got to work on is how you respond to those emotions, right? All of us as human beings, it would be very scary if somebody said that only if you don't feel any anger are you a peaceful person. That is not true at all. It's a completely healthy emotion. And we have to teach our children that, right? Every negative emotion, we have to tell them that there is a world of emotions and there are more names for negative emotions than positive emotions, because as human beings, we feel them. But we need to practice and cultivate skills that helps us respond in a more peaceful manner. And this again brings me back to like some curriculums from CIT, which actually puts words to what is empathy, what is compassion, what is equanimity, and how can we kind of take a little bit of distance from everything that is happening in the world and think about it, not rationally, so to speak, but with a more in Hindi, there's a word called sthirta, with more stillness. And I think that's exactly what all of our scriptures also say.
But, when it comes to real situations, like, for example, someone failed exam, like I deal with it sometimes, being a student, like we always fail at least one exam in our life. So how can we deal with it in a more peaceful way?
I think we've all failed exams. And as kids, if that is something that deeply bothers you, it's okay. Embrace that emotion, embrace that sadness. Like, you're feeling, make room in your home, within your families, for all of those emotions. So you don't have to deal with everything in a completely calm state of mind, but you want to get knocked back into your resilient, more peaceful zone quickly. So the skill that we're cultivating is not, you never want to feel anything that is an extreme emotion. You will feel them. But what we want to cultivate here is, how do we get back into a resilient zone really quickly, right? How do we bring ourselves back? How do our children bring themselves back? And children, I feel like, are innately resilient, right? They'll bump into something and they'll really quickly come back from it. And that's a skill. So
how do you think we can go back to that? Sorry.
So there are certain skills that I use personally. And it's literally like the first skill of compassionate integrity training, which is called calming the mind and body. And they're really simple skills which you'll see and you'll be like, hey, this is really easy. But when you practice them, they're incredibly hard. So there are 3 of them in the first skill, which is tracking, resourcing, and grounding. And it physically helps. It's understanding your body also, right? So when we feel like a surge of emotions, trust that your body feels it before you understand what that emotion is. Whether that means that your heart is going to beat super fast, your nervous system is going to act up. And a lot of this is based on us, on evolution and us as human beings, and is scientifically understood. And you're a medical student, you obviously understand how the brain works and the nervous system works, right? So when we start to understand how our body is speaking to us, you're able to start catching up to what you're going through or what your emotions are before your intuition says, hey, now I'm feeling sad, or hey, now I'm feeling angry, or this is going to happen to my body. So that's what tracking does. And resourcing is a really simple other technique where you bring to mind something that can take you to a more calm, peaceful place. And these are practices that are hard. They're practices that need time, and they need like patience, because most of the times you'll try, but it won't happen. So it's a sort of meditation in a way also. And so does grounding do. And I feel like grounding for me works the best, because for me, I'm an extremely nervous person, right? I have to ground myself before I go on air. Even when I was an anchor, I did 3 shows a day. I needed to ground myself every single time, even if it was the 100th time. I'm an extremely nervous person. But it actually physically helps you. It actually slows down your nervous system again. So those are some things that I use, which made a world of a difference to my life.
Wow. I should try that before my exams.
You should. It really helps. You should actually, if on the World Peace Day, we're doing a masterclass on this first skill, which could be really useful for the youth. And there are 3,000 youth from 120 countries who are coming together for this one skill. And we're launching an SDL version so we can reach out to as many youth in the world. So you're welcome. Your entire group of youth is welcome to be there.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you so much. So how do you think we can contribute to the world peace?
I think we have to take control of the movements around us, right? And when I say movements, I feel sometimes, like I said, and it takes me back to what I said right in the start too, is we keep thinking that we're going to go like far away from the world and get world peace, but it's literally around us all the time. And there are such little things, whether it's somebody that you see on the road or somebody that you can help on an everyday basis. It's something that you can correct within your social structures. I think that is how you get world peace. You slowly open up your world. And there is if every single person played that role, where we created a safety circle which could grow, eventually when they meet each other, the world would be a peaceful place.
But what can we do on like everyday basis? For example, when we communicate with our like college professors or our friends in university or school, or our families at home, like what can we do to have a more peaceful life?
I think it's incredibly important to have dialogue and talk about the things that matter instead of fighting about them. I think right today, when you look at the world today, I'm not even just saying from the Indian perspective, though I'm more acquainted with that and I'm more deeply involved with it. But the divides that are there in the world today and the fights that we're having in the world today, they feel like there'll never be a resolution. So even at a really simple level with friends and with family, we need to start talking about what is important. We need to start talking about how we have so many biases within us as human beings. I teach this. I still feel like I struggle with some of my own biases, and it's incredibly hard to accept that. And it's there in every single family structure, in every single social structure. We are in the place, and it's within our power to change that. And I think till we don't start seeing what's literally in front of us, right? And that could be people that work within our households. That could be people that are not at the same level of economic status, power status. If we start to look at all of that and say, hey, listen, can we spread common humanity, and can we like open our minds up and accept people's opinions, treat people equally? That's the simplest thing we're unable to do. And I think there's so many things we do out of ignorance, and there are so many things we do because we have lack of knowledge. And I think the world today is one, and we have to inform ourselves.
Yeah, we should try doing that more often.
Yeah. Like, children should not see violence. If the world wants to, if as adults, we're unable to curb the violence within us, we have to protect our children. There is no way we're going to see a peaceful world if we're going to inflict violence upon children. And children, even if children see violence will always perpetrate violence. It's trauma. And if we have to stop that in whatever region, in whatever conflict zones, our children have to be protected no matter where they are. And I think for me that it was such a simple thought, but I was like, this cannot be happening to the world.
Wow. You have such a great experience, and it's so inspiring. How do you think maybe you never thought about it, but how do you nurture peace, and how do you celebrate it in your life?
I think I'm very conscious of wanting a peaceful life. And I'm also extremely conscious of the fact that if I let injustice happen around me and I don't do anything about it, that doesn't count for a peaceful life. So those are two things in my life around me that I'm constantly bothered by. Sometimes I'm not in the position when I see injustice, I'm not in the position to do anything about me, and that deeply bothers me. To me, it doesn't sit well with me at all. So it's something that I practice, and it's something that I make sure as a family we at least have a conversation about, for sure. And when I celebrate peace, I feel like I'm extremely aware of my privilege when I celebrate peace. And I think in the world that we're living in today, even though history might have seen far worse times, this is one of the most painful times we're seeing in history. And if we looked at the world and said that everyone's pain is my pain, and everyone's joy is my joy, and everyone's peace is my peace, I find it hard to wholeheartedly celebrate peace today, because I feel like we have a lot more work to do before we can totally sit with the privilege of peace today. People are suffering, and it's very easy for some of us to sit in and say, hey, it's been great to work from home in COVID times. But when you kind of see what happens to different sections of society, I think we're, as a collective, as a global collective, I don't think we can today say, hey, we're a peaceful world at all. So I'm quite conservative when I celebrate peace today.
And how can we nurture it?
I think it's important to nurture it on an everyday basis, right? You wake up in the morning and you're grateful. You're grateful for what you have. you say that, hey, listen, I'm going to make a difference today. I'm going to give my best today. I'm going to be passionate about what I do. And I'm going to sleep feeling satisfied, content about what I've done. And to me, work brings in a lot of peace, because that's what I do a lot. And I interact with people across the world in different continents that are doing that peace building. So that gives me a lot of hope. To me, that is how I nurture it. I kind of see like the little ray of hope everywhere that is there, and I gather that.
How can we deal with negative situations around us? How can we stay peaceful when, for example, someone is fighting near us or someone is being rude to us? How do we maintain peace and don't, follow the urge to answer someone in a negative way?
I think sometimes negative things that you have to say, as long as they're honest and they are difficult and they are said correctly, are also important things to say, right? I think confrontation is incredibly important. We don't always speak when it's the right thing to say or it's the nice thing to say. So I think as the youth, we have to give ourselves the power to speak up, for sure. But if you mean, do we want to be violent? Do we want to be confrontational in a violent way? I think there are 100 different ways of like dealing with that situation, where you kind of take a step back and say, I am not going to do any good to the situation right now. And maybe there's a moment later, maybe you kind of see the moment and it depends a lot on what that moment really is, right? If a man is beating a woman, you might intervene in that moment anyway, because you're protecting two people with different power in a situation which kind of needs help. So it depends a lot on what that situation is. But I don't think there is one rule to any of these things. It's important in that moment, if your intention is correct, it's important to do what for you. And it's intuition, right? Like the series is called Intuition. I think the human intuition is incredibly powerful, and you have to you listen to that.
So it is kind of about handling the situations with inner peace.
Yes.
So you know what you're talking about, you're like being confident, and you know the reason why you're talking, like not because of emotions and anger, but because it makes sense.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, you have the inner peace.
Absolutely. And that's what dialogue is, right? That's literally what we need to make place in the world for. When you go on the online platforms and you kind of see, why can't we just speak about things we think about differently without hating on each other so much, right? If you and me think differently about a political party or about a certain situation, we don't have to hate on each other for that. I think it's important that we have different opinions and we open our worlds up a little bit.
So is there anything we can do? Like, it feels a little bit overwhelming in a way, because the world is so big and we are so small, How can we change the way we talk to each other, even on social media? Because it's so easy to hide behind a computer, we can all hide behind the computer and like write something, but how can we change that? How can we make sure that we are more heartful, that we are more peaceful, and we are kind to each other, that we're more human beings?
I think we have to ask ourselves where this anger comes from, right? And I feel like a lot of anger that you see today from even the youth, and it bothers me deeply when it's the youth, because I feel like we got to keep it together. And if we're not one force, and that doesn't mean we have the same opinion, but if you're not one force, a lot of giants around us are going to eat us up, whether it's the media, whether it's society, whether it's social media, whether it's political parties. They are playing on the fact that we're so divided, right? And I feel like that is something that we have to focus on for sure.
So what do you think? Okay.
I was like, let me just quickly get some caffeine in.
Okay, so what do you think the importance of prioritizing peace and kindness is?
I feel like if we had to, in a tangible way, prioritize peace and kindness, we have to kind of change our reward systems, especially in the education system. This is not something that you kind of live half your life and say, hey, now I should cultivate kindness or peace. This is something that we have to start doing since we're literally like in the first year of school. And I keep imagining, like, what if there was a world where every single education system put at core that our humanistic values are more important than a ranking system or an IQ-based system. Not to say that an IQ is not important, a high IQ and a competitive nature is equally healthy for a child, but is it over people, and is it over building leaders that are going to think compassionately at their hearts and be able to live and build systems that are innately kind? And that is only going to come if this is part of our entire ecosystem. It's part of the way that we think, like competition is. And which is why I feel like there's a full piece missing in the education system. And not to take away from how incredible some of the education systems are, I feel like this is something that needs to be a global movement. And that's exactly what I've given my life to today, because I feel if we put this missing piece in, it's going to create a generation of children that will be able to, a generation of children, not just groups of people that kind of come together and seek peace, but there will be a generation of children that think peace is at the forefront of everything else. And I think that's the answer to a peaceful tomorrow.
So it is more heartful education, more following
Absolutely.
What you're feeling inside and listening to yourself, your heart.
Absolutely. And our reward system is so strongly based on an IQ. And I keep wondering, like, what if a reward system was based on acts of kindness and children looking after other children? And imagine how different children would see the world to be when they grow up.
Oh, that would be beautiful. So is there anything specific you do to maintain inner peace? Is there any form of, for example, meditation or anything you practice?
I think one of the practices that CIT introduced to me was analytical meditations. And I always found focused meditations incredibly useful to find myself in the present, and they were stabilizing practices. But I felt like there were so many skills that I wanted to cultivate, and analytical meditation gave me into that, gave me an actual tangible way to cultivate, for example, forgiveness or gratitude or compassion and empathy. And I think it's a practice that should be taught in school to every single child, where you actually taking out time to say, hey, listen, this is a skill I want to cultivate. Your brain is actually, it's a muscle, right? The more you practice it, the better it's going to get. And it's the same thing for gratitude or for forgiveness or for kindness. And in our busy lives, you have to take time out to cultivate some of these skills that we feel like, oh, like we know we have them in us. We don't. So I think for me, that has always been really useful.
And how does it work? How can we practice it?
It's quite interesting. Like in CIT, at the end of every module, you'll have a 5-10 minute script, which could be, for example, if the skill was sympathetic joy, which is feeling joy for somebody else's successes or somebody else that somebody achieved or has gotten, it'll be an entire script that takes you through how you would feel if someone you love experienced something like that, and can you feel joy for them? Someone you don't know experienced that, and can we then extend it to people that we have difficult relationships with? Can we feel happy for them? Can we forgive them? Can we feel gratitude for something they might have done in their lives to somebody else that might have been useful for the world? So I think it kind of, sometimes I feel like these are things that you actually have to practice, like a sport or music or anything else that we actually learn in school and do on a weekly, daily basis.
And how did you start practicing it?
I came across CIT at the World Youth Conference, and though I've always had some of my own practices, this one has such a strong scientific backing and reasoning that I was drawn to it the most. And I feel like it's such a solid curriculum to take into systems, into any kind of institution and systems, to kind of build kinder, stronger, solid systems that are actually being compassionate to people.
And how often do you practice it?
I try to practice it every single day, but on days like this, it's not possible. When your day is just rolling. But I guess there are other practices. It depends. Every single day needs a separate practice. Like a day like this, I need to ground myself, and I know that I need that. And for me, I intuitively know what I need in that moment. And I kind of draw myself, whatever I'm drawn to as a practice in that moment, and that I feel like my body and mind needs, I gravitate towards that.
And how do you feel it changed your life? Did it change your life?
I think it did in so many different ways. And I feel like more than anything else, it's taught me to be just peaceful and quieter and more still. And I guess at the end of the day, when I keep thinking about this, right? Like 60 years down the line, who is it that I want to be? I just want to be someone who's at peace.
And how did you realize that this is something for you?
I think I'm somebody who gives everything a chance. And I'm always seeking answers. And I feel like when you give something a chance, and new things and new ideas and new curriculums and new answers from science a chance, there will be an answer for you there. And I've always been very open to anything that is rich in emotional literacy and social literacy. And for me, I was always seeking that. And I was always looking for answers in conflict. For me, my primary question has always been, how do regions of conflict find peace? And how do we keep our children safe there? And how do we keep our children in peace there? And a lot of these things have come across my way while I've been looking for answers to some of these questions.
So analytical meditation helped you with that?
I think it's helped me with everything. For example, even analytical meditation has helped me with something called empathic concern and empathic distress. So when we feel empathy, there are so many times like it's given me the words for it. We are so overwhelmed that it becomes about us or what we're feeling. And that's not a healthy feeling. And what we really want to cultivate is empathic concern, where we kind of like we're of course at the center of it, but it's not about what we're feeling, but we're able to be empathic about something else or somebody else or a certain situation.
So I think we can conclude here. And I wanted to ask you your advices to youth to have a more peaceful life.
If I had to say 10 things to the youth, this is what I would say. Be unafraid of starting your own micro movements. Be fearless to stand up against injustice around you. Have a lot of peaceful dialogues about everything from politics to education. Embrace different opinions. Be inclusive. We're all human. Listen to your heart. Be compassionate to yourself, the environment, and the world around you. Be full of gratitude. Find peace within you and spread that peace to the world. These are my 10 points to the youth.
That's beautiful. And what is intuition for you?
I think it's listening to my heart. I think the answer is always in the heart.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for coming and joining us. It's so wonderful to meet you.
You too. All of you guys are doing an amazing job. Like, keep making these groups of youth that are seeking peace. We need a lot of them in the world.
Thank you. And for me personally, peace means listening to my heart. And what is peace to you? Please write down in the comments and follow us on social media. Thank you.